so it's really nice to be at this panel. I love this book. I want to say that Betsy Mickle, who's sitting in the audience, is one of the people who was a stalwart with Matt, and the reason that Susie and I know that, for example, Susie Day and I, is because she was one of the people who would call us up at 10 o'clock at night when we came home from work and say, we need to know exactly what date was such and such, because that this amazing book that Matt had the vision to fight to create was in the works. Anyway, so, and it's amazing to be on the panel with these two guys who I won't introduce so that Matt can, but we've all spoken on panels before, because I think it's more observed in the actualization than in the breach that political prisoners get out and hit the ground running, because your heart's broken when you get out, because you know that you've left people behind, and we have victories that we have to celebrate, and the release of any political prisoner is a victory, but people who were released by movements, by fighting, by people who said this is not going to happen, they're not going to be able to keep our comrades in prison, are particular victories. And so we have two sitting here, which we'll hear more about those struggles later. But the other thing that's really important to talk about is that we have a lot of victories yet to be won, and I'm sure that Ori will talk about Mumia Abu-Jamal, who I'm sure everyone, or maybe not, has heard that the Supreme Court turned down a very, very clear constitutional violation that happened at Mumia's sentencing, at trial. And there are others. Leonard Peltier is another one. Matt talked about some of these. And I just think we need to ground all our work in both the victories and in the ones still to be won. And I have to say that when you do come out of prison, being embraced by a community that not only remembers you from the days when some of us knew each other when we were doing organizing on the street before we went to prison, but also people who are willing to fight with you to make your heart whole, is a very, very important thing. The other case that still has to be won, that we're hoping there will be a victory in soon, is the San Francisco 8, which is an example of how the attack on political prisoners. Now, there are political prisoners from any movement that breaks the rules about how you're allowed to resist in this country. And I think that's another reason it's so important to support political prisoners. You may not look like what people did. I guess I should say that what I was in for was a series of 8 bombings of U.S. buildings, military and government buildings. No one was hurt in the bombings. The most well-known, I guess, is the bombing of the U.S. Capitol building after the invasion of Grenada. And a lot of people didn't like it when it happened, and now thinking back, they do like some of these things change. But the point is not exactly necessarily what was done, although of course everyone always has a right to agree and disagree with one another's tactics, but is to support one another so that we make the statement that we will not allow the U.S. government, which is the biggest violator of human rights in the world today, to determine what means we use to fight. So I'll just leave it at that, because if you read this book and if you read that book, you'll hear more about it. But so how do we begin to win these victories that we still have to begin? I want to go back to the San Francisco 8, because I think this is an example of what we have to do, which is organize not the people that we already know, but the people we don't know yet. So what happened recently with the San Francisco 8, which is a case where the government brought almost 40-year-old charges which had been thrown out because they were created out of torture, actual torture that went on, not of, foreign nationals, not of, people who the government had deemed terrorists after 9/11, but of black activists who were part of the Black Panther Party and were tortured mercilessly in New Orleans in 1970, my memory is foggy, 3, something like that. So now the case is brought again, and our then police chief, New York police chief, who had something to say about a case brought in San Francisco, said that he hoped that this case would put to an end, finally, the legacy of the black resistance movement in this country. So that's what it's about. Okay, so there they are, and they're accused of a killing of a cop in 1970 in San Francisco, and a string of other attempted killings of cops that were actual. And because this is a phony case and there is no new evidence and it's complete bull, the organizers around the case were able to talk to the San Francisco Labor Council. I'm not sure if that's the exact name. Yeah. And the San Francisco Labor Council, which represents labor unions, labor people all over the Bay Area, issued a resolution saying to the governor of California, saying drop the charges. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the cops have their union and they're part of that council actually, so they made a stink and they got it to a situation where there had to be a revote because they said, we can't, this is a terrible thing. Now, usually what happens when some group issues a statement in support of political prisoners and then the cops get busy and say, oh, no, don't you understand? They're killers, they're terrorists, is that the people, fold up shop and say, oh, we're sorry, we didn't mean it. But this time, organizers in San Francisco went to every union person they knew. And, people are in unions. I mean, some of us, unfortunately, have not won our union struggles, but others have. And the unions, the council stood firm, and they voted again, and they voted again for the resolution for the San Francisco 8. So that's really important.